First and 12. A weekly roundup of America's most competitive football conference, the Big 12. Your hosts are Mitch Harper and Alex Kirry.
Good evening. Welcome on into First and 12 here on KSL News Radio. Mitch Harper and Alex Kirry with you. We've reached the season finale. Final episode of First and 12, your weekly check-in on Big 12 football. Season's at the end of the road here, Alex.
Yeah, now what? Then what do we do? Well, the good news is there's no news to really all people are doing around here, especially in the state of Utah, is just sitting around waiting for that Big 12 championship game. Yeah, the season's a wrap, but the news is never a wrap, and this time of year is always very weird and interesting, and we'll get into all that. I do want to go backward, though, in this first segment to look at just some of the things that happened this season. And, I think that for me, and we're going to get to our First and 12 headlines from this last week, but I think if we were to look at this and look at the headlines from what this season was and what this season means to the Big 12 and all the things that come with it is we were shocked again. It was another year that we were blown away by some of the performances. And yet at the same time, the write it down and book it for Texas Tech and the recruiting prowess that they had during the offseason, the money that they spent on the talent, the continued backing that they have. I think the solid coaching that they get from Joey McGuire also cannot go unmentioned because that program has risen to the top, and I think it's in that S tier, as the kids would say, Mitch. Right? That they're in the top of this thing, man, and they finished at the top. And I know that they finished with the same conference record as BYU, but obviously the head-to-head between those two teams, until proven otherwise, which we could see something proven otherwise this next week. Think about the storylines of this conference to go now, and Brett Yormark brought it up this week. By the way, we added 8 new teams over the past 2 seasons, and I know he says that from a look at my resume standpoint more than anything. Like you were in that press conference.
He does bring that up a lot.
He brings it up a lot
now that you mention it.
But that's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot that goes with that. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen, and each one of those programs. It's one thing to get added to a conference. It's another one to have your athletic department, your football program, all those things committed to the level that the Big 12 wants, which is, hey, how committed are you? Are you spending resources? They talk about it now at that clip. And so who's been spending the resources? I don't think it's necessarily a total one-for-one, like, hey, if you're the top spender, you're number one. In Texas Tech's case, it is. After that, what's been interesting is to watch teams like Arizona State, who wasn't able to complete the back-to-back. And I know they lost their quarterback. It was a shock to me they lost 4 games. It was a shock to me that Iowa State lost 4 games. A shock to me that Cincinnati went on a quite a bad losing streak at the end, even though we didn't expect them to be where they were at. Cincinnati was a shock at the beginning of the year with how well they did. How about Arizona turning it around? I think Arizona's akin to a Colorado from last year, all right? You look at it and you go, man, 9-3. For Brent Brennan to do that, and I feel bad because I feel like they've done it too quietly. And when I say too quietly, I mean I don't think we talked about it enough. And maybe it was because they came on so strongly at the end and, kind of surprised everybody. But Arizona was a shock to me. Don't sleep on Houston doing a great job. I think their schedule is a little bit softer than Arizona's was to get to 9-3. But think about where that program was last year. Think about where they were. Think about where Utah was last year. As big of a turnaround as anything. They go from 2 wins in conference play to 7 wins. You saw BYU do that in their second year. That can't go ignored. And then at the same time, you've got teams that are at the very bottom that feel at the very bottom. Oklahoma State has not won a conference game in 2 full seasons now. That's as embarrassing as anything that we've ever seen in this conference in the recent 2 decades or 3 decades since 1996 when this thing got formed. And it's shocking that it came out of Stillwater. And it's shocking the coaching carousel that now gets going. All these things add up to, I think, exactly what Brett Yormark's point is, which is you have a lot of teams competing every year, and you actually don't know which ones are going to be the ones to come up and be that competing team. Just like you don't know which ones are going to be the ones who fall off and you expected more out of. I'm looking at you, Baylor. Or even like an 8-4 TCU that was 8-4 at this time last year too. Yeah. And we forgot about that 8-4 TCU team. And then they go on to win their bowl game. They win 9 games. So you see what I'm saying? Like everything it just points to the conference being pretty darn strong as a whole. And yet, they're fighting against the big brands to try to figure out a place for themselves in the college football playoff, which I think will probably only include one team.
And I think that we've also seen, too, that this year you've got the building pieces, building blocks of some real powerhouses emerging in the Big 12. I think Texas Tech's going to be that in the Big 12 moving forward because it's not just this year. I think that's what's kind of intriguing about Texas Tech that's kind of going underreported, I think, is that the way that they're recruiting, we'll see signing day coming up tomorrow, and the recruiting classes that they're building for the future, they're getting some of the best recruiting classes in college football.
Whereas like Colorado, you saw them build what they've been building, and you feel like it is a house of cards.
Yes,
bit, yeah?
Whereas Texas Tech, they've got this infrastructure and resources, and they had a light schedule this year, but they are dominant this season. And I'd also say BYU is emerging as one of those consistent players. Now, lots in flux with BYU when it comes to the status of Kalani Sitake. Where does that go? That's a question there when it resides with Kalani Sitake. But BYU to follow up an 11-win season with another 11-win season, that's huge because typically in this conference you just think, okay, the top half of the league in 1 year, just bank on probably 4 or 5 of those teams being in the bottom the following year. You're building some consistency as there's more familiarity with these programs and going up against each other year after year. This is only the second year of the 16-team conference, and I think we're starting to kind of maybe identify who those top programs are. And I would also say, too, Arizona State's in that mix, even though they go 8-4, 6-3, so many injuries, and to still get to 8-4, I know it ended with a little bit of a dud at the end there in the Territorial Cup, but Arizona State's here to stay as long as Kenny Dillingham is here to stay too. And I know he had a kind of an indirect tweet about coaching changes, and then he deleted it on the heels of the Lane Kiffin stuff. But as long as Kenny Dillingham's there, ASU's here to stay. And I bring that up because that's going to be the key for one day for the Big 12 if this 12-team playoff continues, this format, to give them a chance to have multiple teams because we've clearly seen that the preseason biases can sometimes anchor or keep teams elevated high in the rankings. Mm-hmm. And if you're not preseason ranked high, you get anchored down. And it's key for these teams that have consistently good years. Then it goes, you know what? No matter what the changes, that team's always in the mix. And I know that sounds so dumb, but that's kind of the narrative of how things work in this sport. I think that bodes well for the future of the conference.
Yeah, I think Utah's in that conversation too. I think
Definitely.
Obviously the flux that they'll be in if and when Kyle Whittingham leaves, it's going to be minimized by the fact that you're going to have a guy coming in who's been also a part of that journey for a good chunk of the time.
Number one offense this year in the Big 12 after being an absolute joke of an offense. They scored 356 points in conference play. Jason Beck in that offense, they were really good, and it wasn't just Dampier, and it was Bert Ficklin.
Ended up being the number one rushing team in the entire country, besting all of the military academies by the end of it when it was all said and done. And so the things that they did, I don't know if the sustainability of having the number one rushing offense is what they're looking for. I'm certain that Kyle Whittingham, that's something that he would love going forward, but it's not going to be his program going forward either after a time, because I don't know, this could be the final chapter that we saw from Kyle Whittingham. And the interesting thing about him is there's not going to be a lot of flair when he leaves, and you already know how this thing's going to go when he does leave. That's Morgan Scalley who's going to take over for him. So the program would be in good hands there, and I think that's good for the Utes who want to be able to. And you're not just going to automatically just go, I think, and be Kyle Whittingham level of, legendary status if you're Morgan Scalley, but it helps to be in that coaching tree, having played there, having been an All-American there, all those things that come with that. And so I think it's another program that's always going to be talked about as being in that top third of the conference. You can kind of bank it, and I think it's more often than not you're going to see Utah performing versus some of these other teams that can be very, very up and down. Whether or not you can be the team that could just stay up, that's hard to do. That is really hard to do in college football overall. It doesn't matter if you're a big brand. You're going to fall off. You got to figure out how to come back and be really, really good the next year. But the conference this year, 16 teams, it's a lot going on. The most visibility, I think we could probably say, for this conference in its history, and that's after losing Oklahoma and Texas as their big brands, right? And I think that this conference is in a really, really good spot. Brett Yormark thinks they're in a really, really, really good spot, right? Certainly from a business standpoint. That's what he said, right?
The monster partnership. The New Era
Want to
partnership.
think New Era. Want to think
Venmo.
Monster. Want to think Venmo are good partners at Old Trapper, right? So all of that
Big
comes
12
in.
Media Day is sponsored by Microsoft Copilot.
And my friend, Edward Jones, who's going to personally be staking it up for the Big 12 championship this weekend. All right. We'll take our first break. When we come back, we've got our breaking. I say breaking. It's our Big 12 headlines. Our final one of the season from a weekend that wrapped the season. So we'll come right back to that. More to go. It's KSL News Radio. It's First and 12. Stay with us.